The radio call from Foxtrot Ridge cut through our command tent like a blade. Unit Delta 7, we've got a situation. Hostile forces captured Captain Elias Monroe. Repeat, Captain Monroe is in enemy hands. There was a stutter, then bursts of gunfire, Arabic shouting, and finally, a silence so absolute it rang in my ears. My name is Major Alina Vega. When that radio died, I didn't wait for orders. Everyone around me was stunned. Monroe wasn't just a battalion commander. He was my commander. My mentor for nearly 4 years. The one who vouched for me when others said women didn't belong in field command. The kind of man who taught by example, who looked you dead in the eye and asked if you had what it took to lead soldiers when it mattered. Now he was in the hands of a group known for executing captives on camera. The standard response? Assemble a rescue team. Spend hours coordinating with headquarters, mapping options, waiting for clearance. But those hours Monroe didn't have. I could see the options in front of me. Watch the screen, shuffle assets, or act. I traced my finger along the tactical map. A village compound northeast of our station, 14 clicks out, was the likely location. Our intel suggested 18 to 20 fighters were there. Hardened, heavily armed, surrounded by civilians, some sympathetic, some terrified into silence. By doctrine, that was a job for special operations. But I hadn't spent 6 years earning my Ranger tab and combat stripes just to wait for someone else to act when time was bleeding out. I strapped on my gear. Full loadout. 6 mags. 1 custom M4 carbine. NVGs, trauma kit, 2 thermite charges. No backup. No permission. Just purpose. Ma'am, you're not on the ops log, the young gate guard said as I approached the checkpoint. I didn't slow down. Emergency resupply to Outpost Harlan. I replied, eyes locked on his. Comms went out. Orders were verbal. He hesitated. I didn't blink. Rank, when paired with confidence, gets you places paperwork never could. He waved me through, and I drove east into the Kader Desert under cover of night. A civilian pickup with nothing marking me military except the steel behind my eyes. Every turn of the wheel carved a line between regulation and resolve. I knew these roads, had walked them, charted them, learned which villages let you pass and which sent rumors racing faster than trucks. The drive took 40 minutes, my NVGs casting everything in spectral green. I parked the truck behind a low hill, shouldered my gear, and walked the last 2 kilometers on foot. The desert was still, but not silent. A wind whispered over rock. My boots crushed dried thistle. A world of sound most never notice. I noticed everything. When I crested the ridge, the compound came into view. Mud brick walls, flat roofs, shadows moving along the parapets. I counted 6 visible guards. Inside, who knew? But I saw a flash in one window, someone bound, slumped, guarded. It had to be Monroe. 1 officer, 20 enemies. A fortified position. I weighed the odds. 30% chance I'd make it out alive. 90% Monroe would, if I got in fast. Those were good enough numbers for me. I set the breaching charge in silence. Thermite paced across the base of the outer wall, time to melt through the hardened mud brick without a thunderclap. I had 1 shot at this. Surprise was everything. As the charge hissed and ignited, I flattened myself against the dirt, watching the brick hiss and sag, glowing red, then falling in chunks. Then I moved. No hesitation. Rifle up, eyes scanning, each movement practiced. I entered into chaos. The courtyard exploded in shouting. Fighters scrambled, weapons half raised. I cut down the first man through the breach before he even saw me. Second one tried to swing a rifle. Too slow. 2 rounds dropped him. That was 3. 17 left, by my best guess. A truck-mounted gun spun toward me. I dove behind a stack of barrels as 50 calories tracers ripped the air apart. Heat singed my skin even through body armor. I popped up and fired. 3 shots, tight grouping. The gunner slumped. I kept moving. I've trained with elite units, run simulations that mirrored war, but nothing ever prepares you for the real thing. The sweat behind your eyes. The weight of every breath. The clarity of a battlefield where everything wants you dead and you're not ready to die. By the time I reached the main structure, I dropped 9 fighters. I reloaded under cover, the empty mag falling silent into the sand. The remaining hostiles had begun to organize. I could hear shouts, the click of safeties going off, the creak of doors opening. They knew I was alone. But they didn't know me. I kicked the door in and cleared the hallway in 3 seconds. 2 hostiles inside, both startled, both late to raise weapons. One tried to fire from the hip. I shot first. The other froze. Big mistake. He died a second later. 11 down. I reached the back room. There he was. Monroe, tied at the wrists, blood on his temple, eyes clear but furious. 2 guards beside him turned as I entered. My weapon barked twice. They dropped. Major Vega, he rasped. Sir, I said, cutting the zip ties with my blade. Time to go. He didn't argue. Just grabbed one of their AKs and followed as I led him back toward the door. That's when the enemy opened up. Rifles, machine guns, grenade blasts. They weren't trying to guard the hostage anymore. They wanted to kill both of us and call it even. I pushed Monroe down behind a burned-out technical, returned fire, picked off another 2. 13 down. They're flanking, he shouted. I see it. I tossed a frag grenade, cooked it for 2 seconds, then lobbed it into the alley. The blast silenced the flank. I counted 2 more kills. 15. We sprinted for the breach. They were ready. We reached the blown wall just as a burst of rifle fire kicked up a spray of dirt inches from my boots. I shoved Monroe through the gap first, then rolled after him as bullets screamed past. They're coordinating now, he muttered, ducking behind the ridge beside me. I glanced back toward the compound. Movement on the roofs, 2 shooters setting up a crossfire, one running for the remaining technical. The other fighters weren't panicking anymore. They were settling in, preparing to chase us down. This way, I said, pulling Monroe toward the far side of the ridge. There was a dry wadi about 50 meters away, low, narrow, good for cover. I led the way, covering him as we moved. Another burst of gunfire tracked us. I dropped and returned fire, clipped one in the chest. 16 down. But my magazine clicked empty. I swapped mags by feel, one smooth motion, practiced thousands of times. I'd burned through 2 already. That left 4. From the wadi, we crawled into a tight ravine that curved east toward the truck. I'd left it parked under camo netting in the shadow of a broken ridgeline. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to an escape route we had. Monroe slid behind a boulder and tapped his AK. 2 mags left. Make them count, I said. I risked a look back and spotted the last 4. 2 had taken cover behind a low wall, trading suppressive fire. 1 was circling wide. The last had set up behind the technical's wheel, using the vehicle for cover. We needed to end it. Now, I pointed to the wall. Frag. Monroe nodded and pulled a grenade from one of the bodies we'd passed. He lobbed it high, timing it well. The explosion sent dust and debris skyward. I saw 1 body drop. 17. I swung around, found the man behind the technical, and took him in the shoulder. He jerked and scrambled to his feet, trying to flee. A second shot put him down for good. 18. The flanker appeared, silent, fast, smart. He nearly got to our left before I saw him. I turned and fired instinctively, just as he raised his rifle. My shot hit center mass. 19. The last one. He stood up on the roof, hands raised, weapon dropped. I didn't hesitate. 20. This wasn't a POW mission. This was war. When the smoke cleared, the compound was silent. We waited. Nothing moved. Just wind, ash, and the long silence that follows a fight when your ears still ring from gunfire and your brain hasn't caught up yet. Clear, I said. Monroe looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You came alone? No time to wait, sir. He let out a low, shocked laugh. You're insane. Probably. Good. We reached the truck 6 minutes later, loaded it with weapons and ammo from the dead, and turned west. The sun was cresting the desert horizon, gold over red rock. The road was clear, for now. Monroe got on the radio. This is Delta Actual. I am alive. Extraction needed. Grid Echo 4 Tango. Immediate response requested. Static. Then a reply. Copy, Delta Actual. Extraction inbound. Blackhawk ETA 15 minutes. Hold position. I drove. Fast. We had 15 minutes to make it to the rally point, and no guarantee we were alone. The desert unrolled in front of us, a maze of dust and blistered stone. The road, if you could call it that, was little more than tire-scored rock. I gripped the wheel with one hand, my rifle resting across my lap. Monroe scanned behind us, eyes sharp. No sign of pursuit. Yet. They're regrouping, I said. They'll realize soon. And they'll be angry. Angry doesn't cover it, he muttered. That was their execution compound. I know. We hit a rut that launched the truck a few inches off the ground. When we landed, the frame screamed in protest. I eased off the throttle just enough to keep control, but we couldn't slow too much. Not if we wanted to reach the extraction point before more fighters arrived. Explain something to me, Monroe said after a minute of silence. Why'd you come? No orders. No team. Just you. Because nobody else was going to move in time. He gave a grunt. That's the kind of answer that gets you demoted. Or promoted. We reached the edge of the rally grid just as two AH-64 Apaches roared in overhead, slicing the sky like avenging angels. They circled once, scanning for hostiles, then locked into a protective orbit. A minute later, the Black Hawk dropped in a storm of dust and rotors. I parked the truck and jumped out, helping Monroe gather what he could. Ammo, weapons, anything sensitive. As we moved toward the bird, one of the Apache pilots radioed down. You got company. Movement from the northeast. 5 or 6 vehicles, fast. I turned toward the pilot standing in the Black Hawk's open ramp. Get him on. I'll cover. Monroe gave me a hard look. You're not staying. We don't have time for a proper sweep. I'll slow them down. Buy us seconds if I have to. But he grabbed my vest before I could step back. No, you're coming too. They'll follow. You know that. They'll follow us, not just you. That chopper's faster than any of those trucks. Let's go. We climbed into the Black Hawk together. The crew chief yelled over the noise. You good? Monroe just nodded. We're good. Go. The helicopter rose fast, wind buffeting our faces. As we lifted, I saw the dust trails of the pursuing vehicles just cresting the ridgeline. 5 of them, armed, moving like they had something to prove. Didn't matter. They were too late. The Apaches peeled off and headed for them, hell waiting to fall. I finally allowed myself to breathe. My heart was still hammering like I was on the breach team, not sitting safely inside a bird 1,000 feet in the air. Monroe leaned in close. You know there's going to be fallout. I know. Chain of command. Unauthorized action. Risk to a senior officer. They're going to tear this apart. Let them, I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll be in that room with you. Appreciate it, sir. And for the first time since the op started, I realized I'd survived. But the real war? That was just beginning. The inquiry convened 3 days later at Forward Base Amherst. A windowless room, for colonels, 1 general, and a long table stacked with after-action reports, drone footage, intercepted enemy chatter, and my personal file, heavier now than it had ever been. I sat straight-backed in my dress uniform, my Ranger tab gleaming beside the subdued name tape. Vega, Alina. They went down the list. Why did you leave the base without orders? Why didn't you wait for command? Why didn't you coordinate with air or recon units? My answers never changed. Because Captain Monroe didn't have time. Because a delay would have meant his execution. Because I had the training and intel to act. And I did. They played drone footage on the big screen. Grainy but clear. One operator entering the compound, breaching, moving, clearing, eliminating targets with ruthless efficiency. No hesitation. No backup. 20 bodies by the end. 0 civilians harmed. 1 hostage recovered alive. The general, Brigadier Marcus Holtz, leaned forward, folding his hands. We've confirmed the kills. Reviewed the timeline. We estimate Monroe had 3 hours left, at most. Do you understand the precedent this sets, Major? Yes, sir. Do you regret your actions? No, sir. I'd do it again. He was silent a moment. Then, you may get that chance. The others exchanged glances. Colonel Lee, the one assigned to Monroe's sector, cleared her throat. We interviewed Captain Monroe. His testimony confirms your actions saved his life. He also described the enemy preparing for a filmed execution. Your assault disrupted it. Likely prevented a major propaganda broadcast. General Holt sat back. Major Vega. This was unauthorized. Reckless. A clear violation of the chain of command. I braced for the hammer. But it was also tactically brilliant, flawlessly executed, and saved the life of a senior officer without collateral damage. You broke protocol, but you upheld the mission. I blinked. Sir, you're being promoted to lieutenant colonel, he said evenly. Effective immediately. You'll also be reassigned to Special Operations Command, Tier 2, Direct Action Unit. You've proven you can lead under impossible pressure. I could barely breathe. Sir, don't thank me yet. You'll still face review boards, and you'll carry the stain of insubordination for the rest of your career. But you also earn the trust of every operator who saw that footage. Some people prove they belong. You proved you redefined the standard. He stood and extended a hand. I rose and shook it. You'll be working with teams who do this kind of thing officially, he added. Think you can handle that? Yes, sir, I said. And I meant it. My new post was a place that technically didn't exist. A secured facility outside Farson, neutral ground, officially a humanitarian logistics hub. In reality, it was the staging area for operations that never made the books. No names on the doors. No insignia on uniforms. No second chances. Tier 2 Direct Action Group. Call sign, Ember. I reported in at 0600 on a Tuesday. No ceremony. No red carpet. Just a clipboard and a terse introduction from a man who looked like he hadn't smiled in 15 years. Lieutenant Colonel Alina Vega, the team lead said, nodding at me as I entered the briefing room. You all know the story. She went into a fortified compound solo, dropped 20 hostiles, walked out with the hostage. No support. No casualties. No backup. He paused. Let the silence fill the room. I call that exactly the kind of initiative this unit needs. The others said nothing. Just stared. Measuring. Weighing. They weren't skeptical of me because I was a woman. Not here. In this world, the only thing that mattered was results. Over the next few months, I gave them results. Operations in the Kader Triangle, northern Somalia, highlands of Barazil. Missions that began with denials and ended with surgical precision. We hit weapons convoys, dismantled safe houses, neutralized high-value targets. Each op sharpened me. Each one reminded me that I belonged. And the team? Slowly, wordlessly, they came to accept me. One day, one of them handed me a drink after a debrief and said, "You don't miss." That's rare. It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd heard in weeks. Another added, "Glad you're with us. You plan like a machine." I didn't smile, just nodded. That was enough. What really mattered was when they followed my lead without question in the field. When their eyes snapped to mine the moment the bullets started flying. Trust born not from rank, but from action. And always, tucked in the inside pocket of my tactical vest, was the challenge coin the team gave me after my first op with them. One side showed a compound in flames. The other bore 6 engraved words. One operator. 0 doubts. All in. I never asked who designed it. I didn't need to. They understood. And so did I. What I did in that compound wasn't reckless. It was clarity. It was mission focus. It was the line between watching someone die and doing something. The world we operated in didn't reward hesitation. Only results. The missions blurred together after a while. Target in the Gawan Hills. Snatch and grab in Tyree's capital. Disrupt a smuggling chain off the coast of Barazil. Always at night. Always quiet. The kind of wins no one clapped for, but each one moved the needle of global stability a fraction forward. They kept the lights on in embassies and the cameras off on the battlefield. But every time I zipped my gear, checked my mags, and ran my fingers over that coin in my vest pocket, I remembered the first time I did it alone. No safety net. No authorization. Just instinct, training, and fire in my chest. And every time someone on the team hesitated, be it over a plan, a risk, or a call, I saw them glance at me. Not because I was always right, but because they knew I'd make the decision when others froze. The coin started to become a thing, quietly passed to other operators who went beyond expectations. The inscription changed depending on the mission, but the meaning never did. It said, "You acted when action was needed." It said, "You're one of us." Colonel Monroe, now promoted and attached to Central Command, visited our unit once, months after the rescue. He wasn't supposed to, technically. His travel orders listed him as visiting Logistics Site 9. But when he arrived, everyone stood a little straighter. He shook hands, said a few words about leadership under fire. Then he pulled me aside. "You know, Alina, your operation's now in tactical case studies. They teach it at Fort Irwin and Bragg. Most don't believe it was real." "Doesn't matter if they believe it," I said. "It happened." He smiled. "You were supposed to be court-martialed. Instead, you became a legend." I shook my head. I became a better soldier. Before he left, he handed me something. A copy of the after-action report with a note scrawled across the top in his handwriting. Sometimes the right call isn't in the manual. I kept that page, folded into the back of a journal I didn't let anyone else read. A reminder not just of that night, but of what it cost and what it taught me. Because even quiet victories carry weight, and silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes, it just means you bought the world a little more time. By the time I hit my 20th year in uniform, the medals were classified, the scars were hidden, and my name was spoken in the kind of low, reverent tones that made me uncomfortable. Not because I didn't earn the respect, but because every op left something behind. And those ghosts didn't salute medals. They just sat quietly in the corners of your memory, asking if it was worth it. I still believed it was. Most days. Then came the new recruits, fresh-faced lieutenants, sharp but green. They came through the unit like waves. Some washed out. Some adapted. A few, just a few, became the kind of soldiers who made the impossible look routine. And those were the ones I took under my wing. Not because I wanted to leave a legacy, but because someone once did it for me. I told them about terrain pacing, about the tempo of urban operations, about knowing when to pause and when to push. But the lesson I emphasized most wasn't about tactics. It was about timing. When the mission's in front of you, I told them, and the rulebook says wait, but your gut says move. You better know yourself well enough to decide which voice to trust. They called it pulling a Vega. Unorthodox, unauthorized, unbelievably effective. I didn't tell them how many nights I spent awake afterward, wondering if I'd made the right call. I didn't tell them about the weeks after the compound, when I replayed every round fired and wondered how close I'd come to dying. I just told them, make the call, own the outcome. One night, during a debrief, a young sergeant handed me a box. From the team, he said, before disappearing into the mess hall. Inside was another coin. This one bore a new inscription. First in, last out. Always forward. It didn't replace the first one. It just joined it. Side by side in my vest. Side by side in my memory. Because the mission never gets easier. You just get harder, smarter, sharper, more certain of who you are and what you're willing to risk. Retirement came quietly. No parades. No grand ceremony. Just a gathering inside a secured hangar deep in the desert. Everyone there wore the same expression, wary respect. Because in our world, longevity wasn't measured in years. It was measured in missions survived and lives saved. I stood at the front of the formation, uniform crisp, boots polished, and hands steady. Inside, though, I felt the shift, the release of tension I'd carried since that day I walked out alone to save Captain Monroe. I looked out at the faces. Operators I'd fought beside. Officers I'd mentored. Some now leaders in their own right. One or two had the exact same look I wore the day I first stood before Colonel Monroe. Brigadier Holtz, now 2 stars heavier on his collar, gave a few remarks. Lieutenant Colonel Alina Vega redefined what it means to act with initiative. She made calls no one else would make. Not because she was reckless, but because she understood the stakes. And because of that, lives were saved. He gestured toward me. She never hesitated. Not when it counted. Then, in a break from protocol, he saluted me. Not as a superior officer, but as a soldier. One by one, the others followed. No command, no signal, just rising to their feet, saluting not the uniform, but the choices I made and the lives those choices saved. I returned the gesture, then turned to give my final words. You'll face moments when protocol tells you to wait, but your gut tells you the clock's already run out. When that happens, you've got 2 choices. Act and live with the consequences, or don't, and live with regret. I paused. Let it settle in. I made my choice in the Aresh Valley. I'd make it again tomorrow. Because I can live with punishment. What I can't live with is letting good people die while I waited for permission. Silence. Then boots stood and heels clicked together. Not regulation, but real. And that meant more than any ceremony ever could. As I walked off the platform, I felt no regret. Only purpose. The kind you carry long after you leave the battlefield. Retirement didn't mean disappearing. 2 months after I turned in my last set of orders, I boarded a plane bound for a remote training facility in Jordan. The program was designed to train Allied officers in counterinsurgency, hostage rescue, and asymmetric warfare. Most of them had never fired under pressure, never made a decision with lives on the line. But they would, and someone had to prepare them. I stood in front of the first class, 26 men and women in varied uniforms, speaking 5 languages between them, but all carrying the same burden. They'd soon be asked to do the unthinkable. So I started with a story. 10 years ago, I said, I received a call. My captain had been captured. The enemy was prepping him for execution. Command wanted to wait. I didn't. I went in alone. They leaned forward. I told them everything. The breach. The kill count. The fear. The silence after the gunfire. The moment I shoved Monroe into the back of a stolen technical and drove like hell through hostile country. I ended with this. You don't get to choose when the worst happens. You only get to choose how you respond. That became the spine of my curriculum. Not tactics, though they learned plenty of those, but mindset, initiative, mission-first thinking, the kind that saves lives when every second counts. Word spread. The program grew. Philippines, Colombia, Eastern Europe. Everywhere I went, soldiers asked the same thing. How do I know when to act? And I always gave the same answer. When not acting would cost someone their life. Years passed. My hair grayed. My body slowed. But the mission, the calling, never left. And sometimes, late at night, I still dreamt of the Aresh Valley, of the compound burning behind me, of Captain Monroe looking at me like I'd just risen from the dirt to save him, of the coin in my vest pocket, the one that still read, 1 operator, 0 given. It never faded, and neither did the lesson. That courage isn't loud. It isn't clean. It's a decision made in the heartbeat between life and death, to do what others won't, when the world needs it most. And as long as someone, somewhere, was willing to make that choice, the fight wasn't over. It never would be. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.